In this series of classes, we're going to take a look across the created world. We're going to take a survey of the creatures that fill its various biomes, ecosystems, and habitats. Each class, we're going to consider some impressive and often curious creatures. We'll work our way through these wonders of creation by considering an entire group of animals like the mammals, the birds, the reptiles, in order to understand how each classification is unique. And then we're going to investigate some specific examples to see the amazing characteristics of each creature. All along the way, we're going to take note of the complexity, the functionality, and the design, which points to a purposeful origin from God, not the random chance of evolution. In our studies, I will be your in-class instructor, and my name is Branyon May. I'm going to help guide our topics and review what you've learned at the end. As we investigate each unique creature, we will let our expert teachers, Lyons and Kyle Butt from Apologetics Press, explain the fascinating details that make each creature a perfect example of the wonder in God's creation. Now, in order to appreciate something, you have to take time to consider it. As our focus in this series, we will be appreciating the wonders of creation. And we need to start by considering ourselves, God, and the world around us. How can we learn about our Creator? I'm going to have Lyons offer some valuable thoughts as we start this journey together.
Christians in the 21st century think too little about God's creation. Consequently, we think too little about God. We're so enamored with ourselves, our schedules, work, technology, and extracurricular activities, and much more that we often fail to see the stars and smell the roses. Today, perhaps more than any time in history, man misses the apparently simple things in life that should cause us to meditate continually upon the greatness of the Creator. Of course, nothing is more important for Christians to meditate on than God's Word, but in conjunction with God's special revelation, His Word, we ought to ponder about how God's amazing natural revelation, His creation, testifies to God's infinite power, intelligence, and care. Time and again, Holy Writ points to God's creation as proof of His greatness. Since the time of Job, Noah, and going as far back as Adam, man has learned some wonderful things about God by considering His amazing creation. The Apostle Paul wrote that since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead. Perhaps no other book of the Bible leads man to deeper meditation on God's greatness than the book of Psalms. Yet interestingly, oftentimes this same inspired book turns man's attention to God's creation. In Psalm 8, for example, David praised the excellent name of the Lord who set His glory above the heavens, who made the moon, stars, man, and even the beast of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea that pass through the paths of the seas. What did David conclude? O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. In Psalm 19, we are reminded that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows His handiwork. In Psalm 33, we learn of one of the reasons that humanity is to fear and stand in awe of the Lord, because by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of His mouth. For He spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. Consider the climax of the book of Job, when God spoke to the patriarch out of a whirlwind. Instead of informing Job of the exact reasons for his suffering, God spoke to him about His creation. And beginning in Job chapter 38, verse 39, and going through chapters 39, 40, and 41, God spoke to Job about several different animals, including the lion, the hawk, behemoth, and leviathan. Of all of the things God could have said to Job, He spent 77 verses talking about some of His animal creation. He chose to teach Job about His all-powerful, all-knowing, supreme nature by describing some of the magnificent animals that He had created. The prophet Isaiah once wrote about being allowed to see a vision of the throne of God. In the Lord's presence were angelic beings crying out to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." What is the basis of this praise? What is one reason we should be driven to worship God? Isaiah revealed one of the pillars of God's praise in the very next line. The whole earth is full of His glory. Indeed, the beauty, splendor, and design of God's creation should drive us closer to the Creator. His fingerprints should make us stand in awe of Him. They should drive us to our knees in worship of Him, and they should compel us to tell others about Him. As the psalmist sang, we should declare His glory among the nations, His wonders among all peoples, for the Lord is great and greatly to be praised.
Both the Bible and the natural world reveal to us that God is an amazing creator. And as Eric brought to our attention, God Himself used numerous examples of the natural world in order to highlight His character. The goal of this series is to take some time to stop and consider the natural world around us so that we can appreciate God that much more. However, as we stop and consider nature and we look to learn from modern science about the details for how the many wonderful creatures live and behave, there's a prominent idea called evolution that you'll often encounter. What does this modern concept propose? Well, in our studies through this series, we will first look at the direct evidence that we can see and observe in nature as we study the various forms of life. And we will consider what this evidence directly shows us about life's functionality. But to better help you, we will also show the contrast between the concept of evolution and what creation by God says. To introduce this important topic and some contrasts, let's listen to Eric Lyons again as he considers the question, can design exist without a designer?
According to the general theory of evolution, as a result of the alleged explosion of a tiny ball of matter, billions of galaxies formed in the universe. Supposedly, the evolution of galaxies and every planet, moon, and star within these galaxies all came about by non-purposeful, unintelligent accidents. Likewise, every life form that eventually appeared on Earth purportedly evolved by mindless, random chances and mutations over many millions of years. Though atheistic evolutionists insist that the Earth and all living things on it have no grand, intelligent designer, still many repeatedly refer to amazing design in nature. A few years ago, National Geographic published an article titled Biomimetics, Design by Nature. The word design, or one of its derivatives, appeared no less than 7 times in the article in reference to nature's designs. The author, Tom Muller, noted how capillaries between the scales of a thorny devil lizard are evidently designed to guide water toward the lizard's mouth. He then explained how insects offer an embarrassment of design riches. Muller referred to nature's sophistication and clever devices and praised nature for being able to turn simple materials into structures of fantastic complexity, strength, and toughness. Brilliant and well-funded scientists around the world admit that living things perform many feats too mysterious and complicated to be able to replicate. Many atheists admit that living things look designed. In his book, Why Darwin Matters, Michael Shermer wrote, "The design inference comes naturally. The reason people think that a designer created the world is because it looks designed." In his book, Why Evolution is True, Jerry Coyne wrote, "If anything is true about nature, it is that plants and animals seem intricately and almost perfectly designed for living their lives. Nature resembles a well-oiled machine with every species an intricate cog or gear. The more one learns about plants and animals, the more one marvels at how well their designs fit their ways of life." But how can you get design without purpose, intelligence, and deliberate planning? Consider a few definitions that Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary gives for design. A particular purpose held in view by an individual or group. Deliberate purposive planning. A deliberate undercover project or scheme. After defining design as a drawing, sketch, or graphic representation of a detailed plan, the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language noted that design may be defined as the purposeful or inventive arrangement of parts or details. A design is preceded by deliberate, purposive planning, a detailed plan, or an inventive arrangement. A design is the effect, not of time, chance, and unintelligent random accidents, but of the purposeful planning and deliberate actions of an inventor or designer. A designer brings about a design. Thus, by definition, design demands a designer, and one with some measure of intelligence. Unbelievers contend that nature blindly cobbles together myriad random experiments over thousands of generations in order to produce complex living organisms that the world's top scientists have yet to comprehend. However, it's far more logical to believe that just as a painting demands a painter and a poem a poet, the world's amazing designs, which continually stump the most intelligent scientists on earth, demand an intelligent designer. After learning of the uncanny, complicated maneuverability of a little blowfly, one evolutionist confessed to feeling the need to regard the insect on bended knee in admiration. Sadly, many have refused to have God in their knowledge and have worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator. Whereas atheists highlight nature and encourage readers to learn from what evolution has wrought, mankind would do better to heed the example of a noble inventor and designer from the mid-1800s. Samuel Morse, who gave us the telegraph system and Morse code, sent the very first telegraph from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland on May 24, 1844. His message consisted of a brief quotation from Numbers 23:23. What hath God wrought? That is, look at what God has done. Samuel Morse unashamedly testified to what everyone should understand. Complex functional design demands a designer. Morse's code and telegraph system were the immediate effects of a designer, Samuel Morse. But the grand designer who created Morse and every material thing that Morse used to invent his telegraph system is God. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Samuel Morse recognized this marvelous, self-evident truth. Should we not logically acknowledge it as well?
When you pick up a phone to call or text someone, you are using an amazingly complex and well-designed invention. As Eric taught us, the precursor to telephones and our modern smartphones was the telegraph system, designed by Samuel Morse, who credited God's creative power and not evolution for his ability to send a message many miles away in an almost instantaneous way, which was groundbreaking in his time. So one fundamental contrast between evolution and creation is that creation recognizes the reasonable understanding that you need a cause greater than the effect. And when you see something with obvious design, then yes, it really was designed and therefore has a designer. Now, Eric showed some quotes from even those who do not believe in God, but they have to admit there exists amazing diversity and complexity in life. But it's important for us to slow down, consider creation, and when we see diversity in design, to ask the question, why are there so many differences among living things? Right? Why do some people have blonde hair and others have brown? And why are there differences in our height or our eye color or our body types? Why are so many animals scaly and others are smooth? Why do some animals have tails or feathers or walk on four legs instead of two? Basically, where does the information come from to have so many distinct life forms with the ability to reproduce after their own kind? You know, just like buildings have blueprints, that guide that the workers are constructing, the cells of every living thing has an internal set of instructions, a code that is responsible for all of its physical traits. So let's stop for a moment and let Kyle Butt explain the fundamental source for life's wonderful curiosities.
Inside of every living cell is something we call DNA. The letters DNA stand for deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA contains information that is the cause for all the different structures in all living cells all over the world. Why do peach trees grow peaches? Because the DNA of a peach tree contains information that it uses to grow peaches. The DNA in the apple tree cells is different than the DNA in peach tree cells, so apple trees grow apples. Why do some people have blonde hair and others have brown? Why are some people short and others tall? Why do some people have lighter skin and others have darker skin? People have unique DNA code that is responsible for all of their physical traits. Builders use a set of drawings called blueprints to build houses. The blueprints tell the builders where the pipes and the doors and the windows and the outlets are supposed to go. In fact, without a set of good instructions, it wouldn't even be possible to build complicated houses or buildings. Did you know that your body is more complicated than any house? And did you know that there is a set of blueprints in each one of your cells that tells your body how to grow? Those blueprints are contained in your DNA. Architects draw house blueprints, but who drew the blueprints for your body? The Bible book Hebrews in chapter 3 verse 4 says, "For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God." As we look at that DNA, we see that it has a double helix structure. That means it has two strands that link together, and they look much like a spiral staircase. This structure is perfect as it looks like that spiral staircase for packing lots of information in a very small space. Every cell in your body contains a strand of DNA, and each strand is about 6 feet long. How does a 6-foot-long strand of DNA fit inside each one of your tiny cells? Well, God designed DNA to be able to coil and fold into a tiny space. Imagine an electrical cord that is 100 feet long. Then think about looping that electrical cord so that it curls up in a roll about the size of a trash can lid. Then imagine that you have several of those looped cords stacked on top of each other. Well, that gives you an idea of how DNA coils. DNA is a molecule, and the backbone of the molecule is made of a sugar phosphate. The little things that look like stairs are called base pairs. The base pairs store information in a coded language. They're combinations of 4 compounds: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Adenine always connects to thymine, and cytosine always connects to guanine. A strand of human DNA contains about 3 billion base pairs. You may know that the study of DNA is called genetics. It's named after a DNA feature known as a gene. A gene is a group of base pairs that contain instructions to make one basic trait. It can be compared to a word. The base pairs can be compared to letters that make up the word. A gene can be made up of 1,000 base pairs, all the way up to 2 million base pairs. Just like some words are small, such as it, and other words are long, like Pachycephalosaurus, DNA can actually code information like words. And that information is a language. Did you know that researchers have learned how to store information like words and sentences in strands of DNA? They're using DNA like a thumb drive that can collect words and pictures. Some scientists believe that all pictures and words and every bit of data in the whole world can be stored in an amount of DNA that would fit in 1 tablespoon. Brilliant researchers, they've spent years trying to figure out how to make data storage devices smaller and smaller. Doesn't it just make sense that God's data storage device is the best one that anybody's ever seen? You see, DNA can also replicate itself, making an exact copy, and that's how every single one of the cells in your body has the same DNA. The human body contains more than 30 trillion cells. If you could take the DNA out of each one of your cells and stretch it out and connect them in a chain, it would stretch more than 10 billion miles. That means it could go to the sun and back about 60 times. DNA is complex. It's brilliantly designed. It's the best storage device in the world, and there is no way it could have evolved over millions of years of random chance accidental processes. Imagine trying to get instructions for a working, walking, talking robot by taking billions of letters and throwing them all in a pile and randomly pulling them out. Well, that's just not possible. You would need a very smart person to carefully write out complicated instructions to create and design a robot. In the same way, the language of DNA, it couldn't ever come about naturally through random natural processes. Only an all-knowing, intelligent God could design something as complex and amazing as DNA. In Psalm 139, verse 14, King David said to God, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows right well." DNA is one of the most amazing, one of the most marvelous works of all of God's creation.
From peaches and apples to insects and elephants, to even you, the fact that DNA is life's language to describe and define everything that's needed for your life is truly amazing. You know, DNA has always been part of life on Earth from the very beginning. And it's how and why every kind of life reproduces after its own kind. But did you know humans only discovered there was something like DNA less than 200 years ago? And really, only since 1953 have we known that DNA's composition and shape. Isn't that amazing that it wasn't the intelligence of humans that created DNA, but rather it took thousands of years and generations of intelligent scientists to simply discover what God had placed into life from the very beginning. As Kyle showed us, the Bible speaks about God making marvelous works, and with wonder and awe, He made humanity. Now, I told you that in this series we'd be talking about some curious creatures and some amazing animals, and we will. But this first lesson is extremely important to help us understand how God wants us to investigate His creation, and some important ideas and concepts to know. So let's test your learning to make sure you're ready for our next lesson. Our first question came from Eric. The Bible is God's inspired message, but has God revealed some of His characteristics through nature? If you said yes, then you're correct. Nature shows design, which means there must be an intelligent designer. God also specifically said in Romans 1 verse 20, His invisible attributes are clearly seen by His creation. All right, now our second question also follows this same line of thought. Did God ever describe His power by pointing out animals? If you said yes, then you're correct. In numerous Bible passages, God used animals to show that He is the powerful creator. So, question number 3, in what book of the Bible does God speak directly to one man and uses animals like the lion, the hawk, behemoth, leviathan to prove that He is God? If you said Psalms or Isaiah, those are good answers because God does mention animals in those books, but the book of Job is the specific book where God speaks directly to one man, Job, and he spends 77 verses referencing animals to prove his point about being the creator. Now, question number 4. Let's think about what Kyle taught us about DNA, that molecule that's so important for life. Where is DNA found in the living organism? If you said cells, you're correct. DNA is found in the cells of all living organisms. Now, our fifth and final question. What function does DNA provide for life? Now, there are several correct responses to this question. If you said that DNA provides a blueprint, a pattern, a guide, information storage, then you're right on the money. Thank you for being part of our class today, taking a moment with us to stop and consider what God has made. We encourage you to be ready for our next class as we dive into the wonders of creation.